Breaking. Michael Saylor is forcing Wall Street to play the Bitcoin game, and Forbes is now reporting that Donald Trump is planning a $280 trillion Bitcoin reserve strategy. We're going to take a look at what's behind these statements. We also have a very critical statement from Bitcoin skeptic Peter Schiff. He criticizes the whole plan from Donald Trump and says that a Bitcoin reserve strategy will never be implemented. Let's take a look at what that's all about. We also see the Rumble CEO who is now really opening up to Bitcoin. First, let's check out the Forbes article. Forbes has recently been very bullish on Bitcoin, sometimes even overly bullish about it. And here it says in a new article, Turning Point, crypto is preparing for a $280 trillion market value after Trump proposed Bitcoin reserves. And here with the 280 trillion are here. This does not mean the Bitcoin price, but the complete market capitalization. I don't know, when they talk about crypto, Bitcoin's market cap might be around $200 trillion, with the rest in various other coins. This is a major headline, and we want to see how Forbes calculates $280 trillion flowing into Bitcoin. The key factor is Donald Trump introducing the Bitcoin reserve strategy. The bull case assumes this reserve is coming with Trump fully supporting Bitcoin. It's really important to point out that the key factor here is actually Donald Trump, who is the one introducing the Bitcoin reserve strategy. The bull case always assumes that this is where the Bitcoin reserve comes from and that Donald Trump is really going all in Bitcoin. The Forbes article states that now that a leak has revealed Russia could outpace the US regarding a Bitcoin reserve, Trump has proposed a renaissance of the capital markets driven by Bitcoin to unlock trillions in wealth, according to Michael Saylor, the founder of MicroStrategy. So, the Forbes report goes back to Michael Saylor's digital asset framework, which he pitched to Donald Trump. He's supposed to go all in on Bitcoin now, doing something similar to MicroStrategy, but not on a small scale at the company level. This is for the entire U.S. And then there's also talk about the leak because there have been rumors about whether Russia is also setting up a Bitcoin reserve. To be honest, there are no official confirmations that Russia is planning a Bitcoin reserve. But here there were various indications that, for example, Russia has been mining Bitcoin in recent years, which wasn't officially known. They've loosened regulations, making it possible to use Bitcoin in Russia now, and Bitcoin is recognized as an asset there. They can also make international and cross-border payments with cryptocurrencies, including Bitcoin, in Russia. This means that Russia is really opening up, and Forbes recognizes the game theory here. The last one to act is basically the loser, and the first one to launch the Bitcoin reserve strategy will be the winner. This means that Russia is really opening up, and Forbes recognizes the game theory here. The last one to act is basically the loser, and the first one to launch the Bitcoin reserve strategy will be the winner. Donald Trump is always talking about China, but Forbes is now focusing more on the threat from Russia, especially if Russia implements a reserve strategy ahead of the U.S. And then the article goes on to say that, among other impressive numbers, Saylor's proposal lays out a vision to expand global digital capital markets from $2 trillion to $280 trillion, with U.S. investors capturing the majority of that wealth, and to drive growth in digital assets beyond Bitcoin from $1 trillion to $590 trillion, with the United States as the dominant force in the industry. And that is a really massive statement here, which Michael Saylor also pitched. And I say it again and again, Michael Saylor and Donald Trump apparently have not met in person yet, and in the end it is very, very strange that they are always talking through two channels. Michael Saylor often gives talks where he discusses the Bitcoin reserve strategy, and in his interviews he talks about it too. He even says, hey, we not only need a Bitcoin reserve strategy, but we also need to sell our gold to launch a speculative attack on all the BRICS nations. So, Michael Saylor is going all out here. He's not just saying that the US should buy a ton of Bitcoin, he's also saying the US needs to sell gold to hurt other countries that have a lot of gold reserves, just to crash the gold price significantly. But it seems there's still no official contact between Michael Saylor and Donald Trump, and that adds a bit of a weird vibe to the whole situation. He even goes further in this report, saying that while the Bitcoin and crypto market is booming, the Saylor strategy will create massive demand for US Treasury bonds. He points to the enormous holdings of US Treasury bonds by the stablecoin issuer Tether, which made $10 billion in profits in 2024. So he basically says that if Bitcoin gets pushed, then the whole stablecoin thing will get pushed too. The question is, how can we keep the dollar going when fewer and fewer countries abroad want it? Russia is dumping US Treasury bonds, along with China and many other big players, and through Tether, you can basically expand the US dollar around the world in stablecoin form. That means when you buy a Tether, you always have a dollar backing it. So a Tether is basically a stablecoin that reflects the value of $1, meaning one Tether equals $1. This also means that the Tether Foundation, the company behind Tether, has to buy US Treasury bonds or T-bills for every stablecoin they issue. This means that the demand for the US dollar is going up, which in turn means that the interest rates on the US dollar are falling. They have to buy T-bills, which are short-term US Treasury bonds. This means that the demand for the US dollar is rising, which means that the interest rates on the US dollar are falling. When interest rates fall, the US can borrow more cheaply, which generally strengthens the US dollar. And when you back it all up with Bitcoin, then according to Michael Saylor, the Bitcoin milkshake theory really kicks in because that means the US dollar becomes the strongest currency. What happens when the US dollar is the strongest currency? I mean, the US dollar is already the strongest currency, but if it really regains its old strength, then all that capital from abroad will flow into the US dollar in 2021, because of course everyone wants to save in the strongest currency. Nobody wants to save in any kind of shitcoin. Everyone wants to save in the strongest currency. Bitcoin is definitely stronger, but Bitcoin isn't a fiat currency. It's something separate altogether. And this could lead to not only a massive increase in Bitcoin's market capitalization, but also a significant strengthening of the US dollar through stablecoins and Bitcoin. And that would be an ultimate combination. The digital asset market could reach a 280 trillion market cap. Bitcoin's share implies massive price increases. Compared to the current 2 trillion, Bitcoin's price would see a significant boost. And how much is then awarded to Bitcoin, whether it is 200, 250, 260 or whatever, is irrelevant. But that would mean that we have massive price increases here, because with a market capitalization of 280 trillion, I mean, we are currently at 2 trillion, that would still be a rise in the Bitcoin price. You can then calculate that. Easy, somewhere in the 7-digit range. So it would really mean that Bitcoin is set to escalate massively in price. And it's really, really exciting to see how this all plays out. But there are also critical voices. Peter Schiff, who usually just talks nonsense, actually made a good point here because he comes from the gold camp. That means he's a huge Bitcoin critic, and he's also a Trump critic, but you have to give him some credit here because he actually said something very smart. Earlier this weekend, Trump expressed interest in buying Greenland. He also suggested that the US may reclaim the Panama Canal, although this could be a negotiating tactic to buy it back at a good price. If these ideas sound crazy, they're not nearly as crazy as the US buying Bitcoin. So here's the Bitcoin reserve strategy. So basically, what Peter Schiff is hinting at is that Donald Trump has a bit of a megalomania. We've seen that with other big leaders or something like that too. The person who took it to the extreme was Hitler. I don't want to compare Trump to Hitler. They can't be compared. Trump is a show-off, talks big, and Peter Schiff warns this could be a scam. Many have high hopes, but Trump talks a lot, and not much will happen. Schiff aims to raise awareness of a potential hoax. Many are hopeful, but Trump just talks, and little will change. That's the warning. A lot of people are getting their hopes up, but Donald Trump just talks a lot. And in the end, not much is going to happen. That's basically the warning. I think that's a legitimate point, even if some of Peter Schiff's other points are completely off the mark. You also have to say that with the Forbes article, we need to be just as critical. Because just because they write that Michael Saylor and Donald Trump want to launch a $280 trillion Bitcoin offensive and create a strategic reserve, that doesn't mean it's actually going to happen. Let's see what the CEO of Rumble has to say now, because what's happening here right now is also really interesting. Rumble has now also massively invested in Bitcoin and wants to double down even more on it.
This is a widely adopted currency, and in contrast to what your previous guest said, it is actually being used. It's being used in multiple ways, and one of the ways I'd like to see it used is on Rumble, where creators can receive donations in BTC or Tether. They can receive donations or even get paid in BTC, Tether, or US dollars, whatever they prefer. And that's kind of the 2001 in the way we're moving the company, and that's the future we see for it around the world.
So we're hearing here that the CEO actually wants to integrate Bitcoin into his platform, and that would be a huge driver for adoption, especially if, for example, Apple, Google, and other big players also implement Bitcoin into their devices, gadgets, and products. Or Tesla could start offering Bitcoin payments and stuff like that again. Apple, Google, those kinds of players, if they also integrate Bitcoin into their devices, gadgets, and products. Or Tesla could start offering Bitcoin payments and stuff like that again. So there are definitely some interesting things happening here. And now I've talked positively about Peter Schiff. Now we need to talk a bit critically about the whole situation, because there was an interview where Peter Schiff discussed things with Fred Krueger, a Bitcoin maximalist. In that discussion, Peter Schiff really went hard against Bitcoin, and Fred Krueger completely dismantled him, making it very clear why the gold bugs are really missing the mark when they attack Bitcoin. Check this out.
That they got rich by buying a store of value.
They didn't have investors. They had people who listened to you, and those people have underperformed Bitcoin by a mile.
Everybody is falling short compared to Bitcoin. Well, I mean, what difference does that make?
It makes a difference because you're in the wrong asset. That's the problem. Okay. Literally, you're getting paid to give financial advice, and you're giving really bad financial advice. Your track record is literally the worst of any person in the world. Because I don't know anyone who's been negative about Bitcoin since it was $1. I don't know people who say not to buy Bitcoin.
There are a lot of other professionals in the financial services industry who don't tell people to go out and buy Bitcoin.
So what's being brought up here is really an important point because there are more and more gold bugs in Germany who are shooting down Bitcoin. They're basically responsible for making people poor because the job of Peter Schiff and other asset managers isn't to sell people gold. Their job is to manage money as effectively as possible. And how has money been best managed over the last 15 years? By simply allocating into Bitcoin. And that's basically the crazy thing. There are people who get paid millions and billions a year to manage assets. Okay, maybe not billions, but millions. And what do? They buy some, let's say, semi-decent performing things that barely outperform inflation by 1 or 2%. But Bitcoin, the best performing store of value over the last 15 years, is just being systematically ignored here. And then you say, yeah, other asset managers are doing the same thing too. And they justify themselves by saying, okay, other asset managers have performed just as poorly. And that's basically the sneaky part here. Such statements lead to people becoming poor here. They're not becoming poor in terms of, let's say, dollar poverty, but in terms of Bitcoin poverty. This means that in relation to Bitcoin, the people who buy gold here, who invest in MSCI worlds or something like that, will be 2001% poorer because Bitcoin outperforms the MSCI world, outperforming gold. That doesn't mean that it has to continue like this in the future, but you can't categorically rule out Bitcoin here, so you can just make a 5% allocation or a 10% allocation. But the fact that you are attacking Bitcoin and on the other hand understand the whole monetary system and are still such an anti-Bitcoin enemy, that is simply not, I would say, understandable to me. But feel free to drop me a comment if you understand this. If you want to buy Bitcoin here and outperform every hedge fund manager, Peter Schiff, and all the gold bugs, then check out Bitcoin, the easiest way to buy Bitcoin here in Europe. Here, with the code Bitcoin Hotel, you can get up to 20% off the fees when buying Bitcoin. It's super simple. You can just chill in a hammock and outperform all the Ray Dalios and hedge fund managers. It has worked really well in the past. But this isn't investment advice. You definitely need to check for yourselves whether it makes sense for you or not. But check it out, 21 Bitcoin. Let me know what you think about the whole situation. Until then, peace out, usend.